I'm Sarah Fensky, and this is the 314. Every episode, we sit down with St. Louisans who know what makes this place tick. Together, we explore why things are the way they are and how we can make them better. This episode of the 314 is sponsored by Cardinal's Special Events. Many people who own large buildings in downtown St. Louis are selling. Not Alex Oliver. In the past year and a half, his company Oliver Properties has made a big bet on downtown St. Louis. He acknowledges that downtown is facing many challenges, but he also sees significant potential. He joined the 314 podcast earlier this week to explain why he's still bullish on Washington Avenue, and a simple policy change that he thinks would make it safer for residents and visitors alike. Alex Oliver, welcome to the 314.
Thank you for having me.
So a lot of developers have been selling their buildings in downtown St. Louis in the past few years.
Yep.
You have been buying buildings instead.
Correct.
So why is that?
Well, I think it's really been an interesting opportunity. There's a lot of ownership that we are primarily acquiring from that the buildings have not been reinvested in probably the last 20 years. So downtown, and particularly kind of the north edge of downtown along Washington Avenue, there was a really quite large development phase from like 2004 to 2008 when these historic buildings that had been textile manufacturing. So in the early 20s, 30s, and 40s, St. Louis had the largest textile industry, even bigger than New York. As all of that overseas and outsourcing and everything took that over, these historic buildings with tall ceilings and wood floors and beautiful architecture were kind of languishing, and the state of Missouri passed the historic tax credit program. So there was a massive amount of redevelopment. So a lot of these buildings were converted to residential condos, residential multifamily, and now those are all reaching 18 to 20 years old. They need a lot of reinvestment. Then that stacks on top of 2020 to 2023, COVID, office market vacates, criminal activity problems. A lot of owners have been throwing up their hands, and because it takes intensive management and intensive capital and intensive operations to right the ship when a big building starts going sideways, because most of these are very large properties. And we found that, we bring that skill set and that experience. So I think we're a unique buyer for owners that don't want to or don't have the capability or the capacity to do that work, to get into the hands of the person who can do that work.
And you recently, I think this was earlier this month, you closed on the B Hat building. That's
Correct.
1,000 Washington Avenue.
Yeah, 1021.
1021.
Yep.
Okay. So how many buildings does that make for you right in that same sort of central part of what we all think of as Wash Ave?
Yeah, so, Wash Ave, it, from the river all the way to Jefferson to a certain extent could be considered all of Wash Ave. The density and the sizing and the use of it all varies quite a bit. So our focus right now is kind of in the 10th to Tucker area. That's where we have a lot of the ground floor retail, bars, restaurants, shops, activation, residential up above. So in those two blocks right now, we're up to 6 different properties that we've acquired. And then we're pursuing several more as we start to look further west on the street on Wash Ave. What else might be out there? So yeah, currently we're at 6. We do have a couple that are down closer to like 18th Street, 17th Street. So in total on Wash Ave, we've got like 7 properties and just around 500 apartments.
And that's all been in the last
15 months.
15 months.
Yeah,
so this has been quite a buying spree.
Yeah, we bought our first one week of Thanksgiving 2023.
So you're going whole hog. You're not just dipping your toe in and saying, start with one building and see how it's going.
Right. I mean, sort of. I mean, to a certain extent, there's certainly more we have said no to than we've said yes to in the last 15 months, which is a little staggering when you consider how much we've said yes to. And part of that is very intentional. The problems aren't just inside the 4 walls. Part of the distress that's happened on Wash Ave has been the fractionalized ownership. And that ownership structure could work as long as it was a growing, booming, kind of building on the hype cycle of 2004, 2005, 2006. It was cool, it was trendy, it was new, it was stylish. It's great, let's condominiumize buildings, let's have separate owners. But when the market starts getting distressed, it's very hard to right the ship when you've got one owner that has a 5,000 square foot retail space and he's he's underwater. He doesn't have the wherewithal to right that ship, to incentivize, get a better retail tenant, to really activate the retail space, because he's living and dying by the rent on that one space. By us reassembling this ownership, I now have 500 apartments. We've got around 50,000 square feet of retail. We're about 90-10 residential. So we can leverage all of that scale of the residential side to incentivize the retail, get users in there, get tenants in there, get the street activated so it becomes amenities for our residential space. So actually the assemblage is actually part of the strategy. That's a very intentional thing that we want to assemble the ownership so that way the retail has an intentional, cohesive strategy, the residential has a cohesive retail strategy, the street improvements, the parking, the lighting, all of this is under a unified strategy as opposed to everyone's got their own ideas of what's going to work. And that works, again, pretty well when the market's going up and really poorly when the market's going down.
And is the market still going down as you've sort of made this big bet? And you've been public about making this big bet.
For us, it is not. Our leasing velocity is, I would stack it up against anybody in the region. In the last 90 days, just at a 300 unit portfolio we've signed 43 leases. 43 leases in 90 days. That's through, whatever you want to call the snow disaster of January, super cold winter, Christmas, New Year's, holidays. So that's from February 15th back to, December 15th.
This is not a time of year when people want to move.
This is not a time of year when people want to move. The weather's been, prohibitive of people going out. Businesses are slow. Everybody's been slow. And yet we're still having that leasing velocity. I think people are responding to, we've built the right product in the right place where people do want to live. And at the same time, we're surrounded by owners that are heavily distressed. There is high vacancy in the market. There is, people are reaching out to us all the time that unfortunately, are over their skis. A lot of people, maybe overpaid, didn't really have the operational background to know what to build or how to manage them. They've rotated through 2, 3, 4 different management companies because they're an ownership only group. They don't have the management side. And they keep, scrambling to see if they can find the next fix. In the meantime, they're running out of cash flow. They're running out of money. Now they can't fix up their units. Now their units get distressed. Now they start lowering their screening standards. Now you start having problematic tenants. Now you start having crime. Now the crime chases away people wanting to be on the street, which makes the retailers want to leave, which makes the office users want to leave. And you get downtown 2025.
So how do you break that?
Exactly what we're doing. The opposite of all that.
Yeah.
Strong screening, strong management, reinvesting in the property, having a cohesive retail strategy, having a cohesive parking strategy, having a cohesive security strategy, having a cohesive plan, and then management. I pound the drum quite a bit. That's really the unsexy secret sauce, is it's really strong operations on a daily basis. And it's not cheap.
And you talk about that security element. I mean, Do you have security guards standing out in front of these buildings?
Not standing out. Yeah, no, we do. We have security. I mean, that's a cost of doing business downtown. I am really curious, and I don't know if anyone has the research, but I would guess between individual property owners, special taxing districts, GSL, the police department, I would assume we probably have the highest dollars per block spent on security in the entire region in our downtown area.
And do you think it feels safe when you're down there?
Yeah, I live downtown. My office is downtown. I walk to my office. We're investing in properties downtown. I think it is safe. That's not to say there aren't challenges and there aren't problems. But yeah, as a regular, someone walking the street, going to a restaurant, going to a shop, going to a business, I absolutely think it's safe.
And do you think that's true even if we get after midnight? It seems like a lot of these high-profile incidents we'll see on the news. When I look at the fine print, I'm like, oh, that was 2 a.m.
Yeah, so that I think is a nature of the business more so than the location. I think that maybe is a conversation we can dive into deeper, but if you have a 2 a.m. nightclub, I don't care where you park it, odds are pretty good. If you have a 2 a.m. nightclub, you're going to have a lot more criminal activity than if you have a, 6 p.m. Mexican restaurant dinner crowd. It's just the nature of the business. If you're inviting people to have high consumption of alcohol late at night into early in the morning, just run those stats nationwide, I would guarantee, say, oh, where's the highest percentage of criminal activity? It's in those types of businesses. That doesn't make them wrong. It just makes them a nature of that business. And so I think that's a real consideration. People are like, oh, downtown's dangerous after 2 a.m. I would say every nightclub is dangerous after 2 a.m. And I think that's a challenge of having nightclubs in a residential neighborhood is why are you putting this in a residential neighborhood?
So let's talk about that nightclub thing. So a man was fatally shot by an off-duty officer. This happened actually on New Year's Day, like bad start to the year for downtown St. Louis. It was like 3 a.m. This off-duty officer working security near at the Wheelhouse, which is over near Busch Stadium, shot him. And then the citizens group, Citizens for a Greater Downtown St. Louis, they said we shouldn't have these nightclubs in downtown St. Louis. This isn't the right place for this. I think a lot of us have this idea of downtown, that's where I go party. That's where things should be open till 2 a.m. What's your take on that?
My take is why? I mean, why do you want to go downtown at 2 a.m. to party? Why don't you want to go to Maplewood at 2 a.m. to party? Why don't you want to go to Chesterfield at 2 a.m. to party? Why don't you want to go to Clayton at 2 a.m. to party? Why is downtown supposed to be the home of bad behavior? Right? Like, let's concentrate businesses that maybe aggregate bad behavior around residential areas, around office buildings, and in a market that is facing challenges. Office users are moving out. Residential users are moving out. Capital is getting disinvested. Why are we trying to concentrate more distress? I mean, that's the recipe for how you destroy a neighborhood, is you concentrate criminal activities because you get cheap rent and cheap drinks and cheap bar, and it spirals downward. I think the Landing's a perfect example of that. That went from what was my understanding is before my time in St. Louis, flying high, became a nightclub area, and then basically completely fell off the face of the earth. I mean, it seems to me like it's the recipe for disaster. So I'm not sure why we think it's such a good idea to continue that just because, someone wants to go to a late night bar.
So Chesterfield, obviously, I don't think you could find something open after a certain point, but it's always felt like that's what maybe gives downtown part of its vitality. It's we go there for sports games.
Sure.
We go there to go clubbing. Is there a way that we could have a nightclub, but maybe it closes earlier? Or are you of the belief, no, we can have a neighborhood wine bar, but we shouldn't have a club?
I mean, I think the reason why you can't find it in Chesterfield is I think people know it's not a good idea. I mean, I think I leave it as simply as that, is we're putting it in the places that have the least guardrails. We're light on policing. We're light on code enforcement. We're light on excise division enforcement. We're light on liquor license enforcement. We're light on everything. Why are we putting things that are already a risky business model in a pocket that has all those inherent risks? We're right next to, 4 pockets of very low income, North City, Metro East, immediately south of downtown. So we're concentrating late night clubs next to, all of these gaps in the system. There's a reason why they aren't going to Chesterfield. Chesterfield won't allow it. Chesterfield has a good excise commission. Chesterfield has strong policing. Chesterfield has strong code enforcement. Chesterfield has these things. So I think it's only going there because it's accepted behavior because we've just looked the other way for so many years.
And you're talking about the excise division. This is the department in the city of St. Louis that's responsible for making sure that people who have liquor licenses are behaving responsibly. Is that potentially the bigger problem here?
They, I think, fairly recently been very public. They are not in the business of enforcement. So then the question is, who is?
And you don't see the police playing that role?
I think they need to be coached into that's your responsibility is to enforce liquor license laws.
They could do that, but they're not doing that.
Maybe. I can't speak to what they're trained on, what they're developed on, but I don't know that's probably the primary initiative. If you have a short staff police force, say, hey, not only are you addressing homelessness and criminal activity and violent crime and nonviolent crime and speeding and traffic enforcement, you're also now responsible for code enforcement of liquor license. So maybe we could.
But it's not happening now.
It certainly seems like one more extra burden on their plate.
Do you think the bigger problem with people coming to cause trouble in downtown is people who are come to clubs and then sort of that spills out into the street? Or is it people who are just kind of coming downtown? There's a group of cars. People have come in speeding. Now they're hanging out in front of their cars, and they might come even if there was no nightclub.
Certainly that's not what I'm seeing. I mean, if I would bet if you put a map on it, there's probably 2 common causes of violent crime in downtown. One is overconsumption of alcohol at late night clubs where people get angry and aggravated and a fight's fairly easy to break out because you're intoxicated. And so your decision making is a whole lot weaker. And then you storm out to your car, you grab your gun, and next thing you know, you got a shootout. The other is drug deals gone bad. If you have people living in buildings that are in illegal activity, a lot of times you enforce your own illegal activity through violent means. Those are the 2 things I see downtown. I really don't see, random gatherings of issues. I don't see that type of stuff. And there's been a few incidents like that in the past, which I think were just really bad planning of the event itself. But again, it's kind of similar to that late night thing. Oh, it's an organized event that said, hey, let's get a whole deep concentration of people all together at the same time, more than likely consuming a lot of drugs and alcohol, and let's see what happens. And generally not good things.
And so when you talk about, maybe drug dealers, that sort of thing, that goes back to what you're talking about you are really screening your residents. You're making sure your buildings aren't going to be contributing to that problem.
Yeah. So at one of our properties in the summer before we took it over, in a 90-day window in the summer, there was over 50 police calls to that property that they needed police response for some sort of activity, some sort of issue in just 90 days. That's more than 1 every other day. 1 year later, we've owned the property now 9 months. At that point in time, it went to 11. So 55 calls to 11 calls. That's the type of impact. That's part of the things that are straining our police resources. That's part of the things that cause the problems in the area is that stuff. It's why I think management is just so critical. When you're dealing with dense properties in, an urban environment, it just becomes such a multiplying effect. You have something happening in one unit, no one else wants to live in that building. They're sharing elevators, they're sharing, garage space, they're sharing corridors. And, it's strong management, strong screening, ensuring that you've got people that are abiding by the rules when you're, providing people housing.
Are you looking for the perfect venue for your next event? Hosted at Busch Stadium, home of the St. Louis Cardinals. Whether it's a corporate meeting, team building activity, or happy hour, they offer unique spaces like the iconic field or the Cardinals Nation restaurant. With stunning views, top-tier service, and flexible event options, your event is sure to be a home run. Book your unforgettable event today at Busch Stadium. Visit cardinals.com/events for more information. And now back to the 314 podcast. I'm here with Alex Oliver, the owner of Oliver Properties. They're making a big bet on downtown St. Louis. Alex has bought a lot of buildings in sort of the heart of downtown, that Wash Avenue corridor, and is sort of outlining his vision for how to bring downtown back. So, Alex, I know you were at least one of the meetings at City Hall where the Board of Aldermen discussed spending the money from its settlement with the NFL.
Yep.
And you were there to advocate for downtown getting a chunk of that money.
Yes.
What specifically would you have wanted to see that money go to when we talk about downtown St. Louis?
Well, I think a big piece of it that we were advocating for is the infrastructure side of things, the streets, the sidewalks, the curbs, the landscaping, planters, parking lots. There's just a lot of infrastructure in downtown, and a lot of it impacts a lot of density and a lot of jobs and a lot of housing. There's 9.8 million square feet of office in downtown St. Louis, 7.6 million occupied. All of Clayton's office market is 7.4. So there's still more occupied office square footage in downtown St. Louis than there's in all of Clayton. A lot of people think Clayton is a way bigger downtown, and it's not. The stats just don't support it. This is the job core, the economic driver of not just the city, but the region. It's critical that we invest in this so that people we want to keep our businesses down here. Our employees want to come down here. We want to have all that tax base and jobs, and those jobs now have hotels, they're going to restaurants, they're going to shops, and they're going to frequent all the businesses, and they don't want to commute very far, so they live in the city or they live nearby. That's what is going to take it to be a place that people want to own a business, they want to operate a business, they want to have an office down there, they want to live down there, is when the built environment sustains all of that, and it's very expensive to maintain.
Do you think the Board of Aldermen, from what you witnessed, do you think they get that?
The outcome was it didn't pass, which is incredibly disappointing, and I think outlines the maybe lack of understanding of the sense of urgency more so than anything. I think it is very important for the city to show the city, the government, is here to invest in the city. And we're investing in the city, so you, Mr. Homeowner, should invest in the city. You, Mr. Small Business Owner, should invest in the city. You, apartment investors should invest in the city. You residents that are looking to move into the city should invest in the city. Because we're here with your back. We're here to make sure that we are righting the ship of declining population, declining jobs, declining density, declining everything. We recognize that's a problem and we want to fix it. And I think maybe that's the disconnect is identifying, are we on the same page with what's the problem we're trying to fix? I see it as the declining population is the number one issue, because that's where all of our tax base comes from.
So Aldermanic President Megan Green was maybe the sort of most outspoken skeptic about this money. She sort of portrayed this as business interests wanted downtown, and that, we needed to support the people by doing things like put money into early childhood education, things that were a little more people focused. What do you think she misses in that discussion?
I think it's a great idea. I think there are a million great ideas. We should provide, free housing to everyone who's homeless. We should provide free school and secondary education to everybody. We should provide childcare for those who need it. We should provide all of these things. We don't have the economic engine to sustain that. So this would have been a short-term solution that at some point would have run out of cash, and then what? Now we're back in the same boat. I think the best analogy I have is, the city is got a gas tank, and currently there's a hole in that gas tank. What are we doing to refill the tank? The tank is fed off of sales tax dollars, earnings tax dollars, property tax dollars, and if we're losing jobs and we're losing housing and we're losing residents, those are the three revenue streams. So what are we doing to say, yeah, people do want to live in the city again? I don't know that anybody is saying I'm moving out of the city to the county or to another state because of childcare. And I'm pretty sure it was also a city employee childcare only program. So I don't think it actually benefited, residents of North County or North City that are, trying to go to school and trying to get jobs and saying, look, the burden to me getting a job here is childcare. I think that's maybe an interesting argument. But if it's we can't recruit employees to the city because of childcare, I don't know that that's moving the needle at all in getting businesses to stay in the city or grow in the city or move to the city or residents to come to the city.
You also mentioned there the urgency, that's maybe what the Board of Aldermen didn't see, is just how urgent this issue is. Do you think that downtown specifically is at a critical point right now?
I think our city's been at a downward slide for decades. When did we peak in population? 1940?
A long time ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're talking a 60-year downward slide. At what point is it too much? I don't know. I think the urgency is just in the sense that it is not getting better currently. We're having a lot of success. And, I don't want to take away from the fact that people do still want to live in these neighborhoods and in these urban environments. But when you've got, 7.6 million square feet of office, average housing office density is, somewhere around 5 people per 1,000 square feet. So, you're talking tens of thousands of jobs. If the average job is $100,000, that's millions of dollars of payroll with a 1% earnings tax in the city. That drives a lot of our revenue to the city. That keeps declining at a significant rate. At what point can we no longer afford police? Can we no longer afford street cleaning? Can we no longer afford these things? That's where I'm concerned about the urgency of it, is are we fixing the things that allow us to fund what we want to do? Because now we have a revenue stream to sustain it, as opposed to taking this one-time windfall, giving a stopgap, but then what do we do at the back end? If we still don't have the revenue to sustain it, then we've still dug ourselves a hole.
Hearing you talk about St. Louis losing population, it's obviously all true. We're all living it. But you are kind of the counter to this, in that you're, like me, you're a transplant.
Yep.
You moved here from Northwest Illinois.
Yep.
You had a job in engineering that brought you here. Was it because you saw this developer's paradise?
Yeah.
You kind of found that after you moved here. What was it that sold you on St. Louis, where you're still here today?
I think it's been really interesting to ask that. I think part of it is the built environment is really attractive here. The age of when a lot of our city was built, the architecture is stunning. I think as a great example, we're renting out apartments in 7, 8-story buildings that were factories. They built these things to build, shirts and hats and coats and gloves and shoes, and yet they still had amazing architecture and arched windows and brickwork and stonework, and there was a real pride of ownership. And I think you see that in all of our neighborhoods. I think that built environment is really attractive as someone who's interested in real estate, is it just makes such a unique product. I think the other thing is our strength of our neighborhoods. We have some very strong neighborhoods that have, walkable environments where there's businesses and small businesses and shops and retail, and it makes it so there's a lot of areas that people want to live. And then, I think the opportunity I find as a real estate team here is, macroeconomically, we are losing population. Macroeconomically, we have, declining jobs. Macroeconomically, we have a lot of headwinds. So, there's not a lot of capital I'm competing with versus, the Carolinas and Florida and Texas and the Southeast. A lot of people are investing there. Now, the downside to the region is that means I'm one of the very few doing it. The upside for me, it means I'm one of the very few doing it. So it created an opportunity, but it's not good for the region. It's good for me. But quite honestly, yeah, it's not good that I'm one of the only people in all of downtown investing in real estate, and I'm not that big of a developer.
So you mentioned the strength of these neighborhoods. You've been living in downtown now, dating back before the pandemic. When did you move?
Actually, no, we moved downtown in 2021.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were living in the Central West End before that. We lived in the Devolver neighborhood. We started off living in Benton Park, but actually our very first neighborhood was Soulard.
Okay, so you kind of hit some of the great St. Louis neighborhoods.
Yeah.
You're now in not the original place you moved to downtown.
Correct.
You're in one of your own buildings.
Correct.
What keeps you wanting to personally live in downtown?
The convenience of it. It's an incredibly walkable neighborhood. I think that's what really stands out to me is there are restaurants and shops and bars, and obviously part of my bias is my business is also down there, so it's easy for me to commute to work. But yeah, it's such an easy neighborhood to live in. I get in my car. I got in my car to come here, and I think other than that, I've been in my car probably twice in the last week.
That's amazing.
And that's the convenience factor I really love about it. It's not like I have to get in a car for every single thing every time I want to do anything. And that was something we found in the other neighborhoods too. Central West End, extremely walkable. Benton Park and Soulard, very walkable. Downtown has that same thing. The advantage downtown also has, though, is it has other like institutional things you can go to. You can go to Cardinals games, Blues games, concerts, music venues. You can see shows. You can see all that stuff. Soccer games. There's a lot of outside of just day to day, live, work, breathe. There's also other things you can do, which also makes that downtown really attractive.
So for people who don't come downtown much, I think there's such a perception. You see them in the comments section of the Post Dispatch where they're like, what? Am I going to wear my bulletproof vest?
Right.
For somebody who hasn't been downtown in a while or has only been to Busch Stadium, what's the place that you might recommend that will help them see downtown the way you see it?
Yeah. I really do think, Wash Ave between 10th and Tucker is, I think, the most vibrant area of all of downtown. Right outside the front door of our 6 Court building. So our 6 Court is right at 10th and Washington. Within 1 block of our front door, there are 9 different restaurants, bars, and shops.
That's
Within 1
huge.
block. Like maybe the Central West End has the same level of density, but hardly anywhere else does. So, we've got Buddy's Wine Bar, we've got Sentai, we've got Rooster, we've got Stanley's, we've got Bella's, we've got Bridge Tap House, we've got Over Under. I mean, there's, and that's just within a half a block right there. That's just incredible things for people to do. And I think that's part of why we are having leasing success is we have looked beyond just what's in the building. Or is there other things outside the building that create amenities? Because there's a lot of properties around that can be really nice residential properties. Like you built the right product, it's the right unit, it's good layout, you got the right amenities, it's all fine and good. But these are large, dense properties. Okay, but why am I living here instead of the same finish and style and everything else in another building that's in the Central West End or in the Bolivar neighborhood or in the Grove or whatever else it may be? And that becomes the neighborhood amenities. And that's what I really see Wash Ave has the strongest of all of downtown is those neighborhood amenities.
And you feel like the people leasing from you, they're picking up on this. They're happy there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's the reason why we're seeing the leasing velocity we are is people are responding well. They're giving us positive reviews. They're, referring friends. I think they are seeing that, this is a great place and a convenient place to live.
Well, Alex Oliver of Oliver Properties, I want to just wish you the best with this doubling down on downtown St. Louis. And thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
That was developer Alex Oliver, owner of Oliver Properties, who sat down with me Monday. St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Kroll will be here with me in just a minute to talk about one of the most bonkers recent stories in St. Louis. But first, this episode of the 314 podcast is supported by Stages St. Louis. Experience the magic of live theater with Stages St. Louis. The 2025 season brings you 3 incredible shows, from the thrilling mystery of Murder for Two to the enchanting pre-Broadway production of Austin's Pride and the inspiring sounds of Beautiful, the Carole King musical. There's something for everyone. Subscribe today and see all 3 shows for one low price. Secure your seats now at stagesstlouis.org. Now, we were speaking about downtown St. Louis. Former St. Louis Sheriff Vernon Betts sought to put more deputies on the streets of downtown to increase security there. Betts was ousted last November, seemingly by voters who were fed up with his antics. But his successor, Alfred Montgomery, is himself off to a rough start. Last week, my partner on the St. Louis Daily Newsletter, St. Louis Magazine staff writer Ryan Kroll, broke a wild story that has some people calling for the sheriff's ouster, others talking about big changes for the office. And Ryan Kroll joins us now to talk about it. Ryan, welcome.
Hey, great to be here.
So, Ryan, you had an incredible story last week. Sheriff Alfred Montgomery literally made a deputy roll a 7 using golden dice in order to keep his job. That deputy somehow rolled a 7, and then Montgomery fired him days later. So as St. Louis Magazine music writer Daniel Hill remarked, literally, this could be a scene from a Coen Brothers movie. This was apparently real life.
Yeah, and we know because there's audio of it as well, which is like a journalist's, dream come true right there. I guess just to back up a little bit. So the deputy, his name was Tony Kirshner, and up until recently, he'd been a deputy for about 12 years in the sheriff's office. He ran for alderman a few years ago under whenever Vernon Betts was the sheriff. Narrowly lost. Then in January 1st, we had this new sheriff, Alfred Montgomery, come in. Kirchner, not only does his father die in January, but also he's kind of gearing up for the campaign to really begin that season. So he wants to take a leave of absence so that he can't be accused of campaigning on the job. He says that Montgomery kind of indicates this won't be that big of a deal. But then whenever he goes to actually meet with Montgomery to talk about this leave, things that go sideways and the golden dice come out.
And he somehow, improbably, rolls the number he needs to roll in order to keep his job. How does he still end up getting fired?
That's a good question. So Montgomery gave him 2 chances to roll a 7. The first one was a 6. The second one was a 7. And I guess basically Montgomery welched on the bet, right? He sort of said one thing and then did another. And you got to feel a little bit bad for Kirchner, I guess, because he still thought he had a job and was merely on leave until I called him asking, what's the deal with you no longer being with the sheriff's office?
Did he seem real shocked by that inquiry?
He did. And I honestly thought he was just kind of putting it on for my benefit. But then he, a few days later, a week later or so, he plays the tape and I said, oh, well, I guess he really thought he still had a job when I called him.
So moral of the story, maybe, don't make a guy do something so demeaning and frankly unprofessional as roll dice to keep your job if you're going to fire that guy anyway.
I guess that's a moral of the story.
I mean, it
But-
feels like Montgomery might have gotten away with this if he hadn't then swiftly fired him.
Yeah. Or if this guy hadn't been running for office, because I don't think that, I would have been interested in just a regular deputy no longer on the job. But this guy happened to be a candidate, or he is a candidate for political office. Sort of law enforcement had been a big part of his political identity. That's why I thought it was a story. And then but I had no idea about the dice until I started digging a little bit.
So you broke some bad news to this guy, sort of set off another terrible round of headlines for this very new sheriff. So he took office just 2 months ago. He's already had headlines over an incident where he handcuffed the city's acting jail director. But it's worth noting that his predecessor, Vernon Betts, also had some conduct that was in some ways just as appalling. Why do you think this office perpetually seems like such a black eye for the city?
I think there's sort of two reasons. The one is that I think it's the city's last patronage job, which means that, if you get elected to that office, you can hire your friends, hire your cronies. It's the old to the victor go the spoils sort of methodology or manner of politics. So the idea is that you kind of just really run that office and there's not a whole lot of checks on your power.
No civil service protections.
Exactly, which is a way of doing government that's largely doesn't really exist anymore, except for in these kind of few isolated areas. But I think the other thing is that the sheriff's office, in most counties in the country, the sheriff runs the jail. Oftentimes they're like the primary sort of law enforcement agency in the area. They're pulling people over for speeding, that sort of thing. In the city of St. Louis, they have a pretty small footprint. They're bailiffs for the courtrooms and the two courthouses in the city. And they also transport detainees from the jail to the courthouse and back. They don't actually manage the jail. They just sort of pick the folks up, like their jurisdiction with the detainee stops where the jail starts. It's really a very kind of narrowly prescribed mandate that this office has. So 99% of St. Louisans never interact with these sheriff's deputies. So, I mean, I don't think we would tolerate this kind of, tomfoolery from the police, because they have some, they have some effect on our daily lives.
It impacts more people.
Exactly. Whereas these kind of antics are just sort of allowed to fester because they don't affect people in a direct way.
It's interesting. In some ways, it only affects the most vulnerable, the most troubled population in the city. This is people in the city jail. But it also affects the city judges, and they have been very unhappy with the sheriff.
Yeah, they want to have, court protection in every courtroom. They want a bailiff there. They don't have to wait. A lot of times, the business of the court will get delayed while they wait for a bailiff to arrive, that sort of thing. Then I guess the one thing I do want to drive home is they may not be directly impacting your life, but your city, your tax dollars are funding this operation. So everyone should have some kind of vested interest in them not, doing this kind of clownish behavior.
Well, so to that end, the city's charter commission looked at sweeping changes to how things operated in the city. I don't think any proposal came out of that would recommend big changes here. Is there something that would make sense so we no longer have this come down to an election when we really just need a professional running this office?
Yeah, I think what would make the most sense would be kind of one of two things. Either basically just give a lot of these duties over to the police. They could be in charge of courthouse security. That would make a lot of sense. The police have daily business in the courts anyway. I don't think it would be that big of a lift for them. I'm sure they wouldn't mind taking the sheriff's office budget and incorporating it into the department either. Or if you wanted to, there's a whole division of corrections that already exists in the city. And honestly, they have a pretty tense relationship with the sheriff's office. So maybe you sort of expand the corrections division's portfolio of responsibilities out of the jail and into the courts as well. I think you'd have fewer cooks in the kitchen, at least, in terms of running that whole sort of criminal justice, a few blocks at Market and Tucker. I think that would work as well. It would be one less agency, less overhead. I think some sort of consolidation, one way or the other, would make a lot of sense. What that actually looks like, that's a different story.
So Sheriff Montgomery was actually hit with a defamation lawsuit just a couple days
Yeah.
ago from Tony Kirchner, who said he was defamed by the statement
Yeah.
that the sheriff put out about this. He's got a lot of problems, meaning the sheriff here. Do you think he can survive this incident, or are people going to be trying to oust him, even if those systemic changes we're talking about haven't happened yet?
Sure. So there is some precedent for removing a sheriff in Missouri. And I think probably to like the mixed emotions of St. Louis City residents, it has to go through Jefferson City. Basically, it would be the attorney general would file a quo warranto, which is a bit of Latin you might remember from the Kim Gardner days, to basically argue in court that this guy has been derelict in his duty in some way and needs to be removed. There's precedent for that, where sheriffs do something illegal or out of line, and then they wind up losing their job via the attorney general's actions.
So once again, this would be the sort of Republican infrastructure of the state of Missouri coming in and taking away the people that the voters chose. I imagine that's going to be Alfred Montgomery's argument for keeping his job. I was duly elected.
I think so. And I think the Kim Gardner stuff's going to make it a little harder for him to argue that, because ultimately Jeff City gave us Gabe Gore, which I think...
Our current circuit attorney.
Exactly. And I think on balance, everyone's pretty happy with him. He's a Democrat, just like the majority of the city. So it'd be interesting to see what happens. Yeah, I'm as excited to see what the next, I'm trying to think of a roll, see what the next roll of the dice brings, right?
And how could it be more interesting than this past roll of the dice? Ryan Krols, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Sarah Fensky. That's the 314 for today. You can find out more in our podcast show notes and at stlmag.com. You can also find me and Ryan every day in your inbox thanks to St. Louis Magazine's fantastic free newsletter, St. Louis Daily. It's a fresh take on St. Louis with insight and original reporting. Sign up at stlmag.com/newsletters. The 314 is a production of St. Louis Magazine. I'm Sarah Fensky, and this is The 314. See you next time.